The emotional pain of an abusive relationship can erode a person's self-esteem and actually feel worse in the long run than physical abuse. Next, learn to recognize the signs of abuse, where and how to get help, and what makes a good relationship on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. Tonight we're taking your questions on abusive relationships. And as always, we depend on questions from viewers, that's you, to help explore this issue. So call the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. Now, you can also text us your questions or email them using the number or address listed at the bottom of your screen. We're going to start by introducing our guests. Cheryl Graham is a licensed clinical social worker with Harbor City Psychological Associates. For the past 18 years, she has served the Family Justice Center and Safe Haven Shelter as a therapist for women experiencing domestic violence and as a trainer and speaker on this topic. Susan Utek is a licensed attorney and has served as the executive director of Safe Haven Shelter for Battered Women for the past 10 years. She's helped hundreds of women by securing protective orders and representing them in custody and divorce proceedings. And Michelle Miller volunteers her time through the Lake Superior Family Justice Center and Safe Haven, where she facilitates a group for women who've been victims of domestic violence. And thanks to all of you for being here this evening. And I think, a place that I always like to start, and where I know that the viewers know I always like to start, is by first defining what is an abusive relationship. And I think, Cheryl, we'll start with you on that.
Well, I think in the smallest definition, it's when your rights are not being respected, and your rights to whatever that might be, to go where you want, to say what you want, to have input into any decisions that are involved in your family life or in any relationship life.
And so that's a broad definition then, that I think a lot of times when people hear the phrase abusive relationship or domestic violence, they're thinking kind of a physical violence. But Michelle, I know you do a lot of work with the women's groups, and you even use the power wheel to help explain to women. But tell us a little bit more about then that concept of the power wheel and how you would explain abuse to the women who you're working with.
Well, a lot of times when I start explaining the power wheel, we talk about how it's basically like a wheel that would be on your bicycle. And there's little pieces. Each spoke happens to be a certain abusive role. For example, maybe financial, wants to use terroristic threats or whatever. So all that together will keep a person in an abusive situation. And then, of course, as the abuse happens to escalate, then, of course, you get to the outer ring of that spoke or bicycle, and that's where a lot of times sexual or physical abuse will come into play.
And so you have emotional abuse, kind of sort of like layers maybe of abuse, with emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse, if we were to sort of characterize those areas maybe for the audience. And let's talk a little bit about emotional abuse and what Susan, I'll go to you. What does emotional abuse look like?
Well, it could be name calling. It could be using your children to achieve some power struggle with the children. For example, getting your children to call the person you're abusing names, or just demeaning that person in front of others. All that is emotional abuse, and it actually, when you talk to women, takes the greatest toll on them as they are enduring the relationship.
And Michelle had mentioned sort of financial control. Tell the viewing audience a little bit, Cheryl, about how that might manifest itself in a relationship.
Well, I think, it's important to look at domestic violence as on a continuum. So we can look at extremes and we can look at minor. But I work with people who make a living, but are not allowed to have a checkbook, have access to the checkbook, to make any decisions about how the money is spent, and be required to turn in their paycheck every week. Or, I also work with people who are blamed for any possible financial problem that could go wrong, and told, you spent all the money, you don't know how to manage money, you run up the credit cards. And in some of those incidents is because there's not enough money given to the individual to run the household, to buy food, to buy clothes for kids, and so they run up the credit cards, and then they're blamed for running up and messing up the finances.
And in that case, the running up the credit cards really isn't, we're not talking for frivolous items, we're talking for basic needs of the family, for basic survival needs. I think kind of what made me also think about, as the two of you were talking, not just limiting access to money, but limiting access maybe to friends and family. Maybe, Michelle, could you tell us a little bit?
Yep. A lot of times being in an abusive situation, what will happen is that the abuser will actually isolate their partner. They'll cut them off. If you're working, maybe they'll keep calling your work to where you'll eventually lose your job, or you just can't take it anymore there. They won't let you hang around with your friends or family. They'll actually cut you completely 100% off from that. They'll be upset with you. I don't like you hanging around with that person. Your mother's trouble, your father's trouble. I don't like that, brother of yours, whatever. They'll find an excuse or reason so that you can no longer hang around with that person, or they'll make it so difficult for you to where you yourself will actually isolate from those friends and family, because you actually feel like you're protecting your friends and family. In some cases, friends and family will actually distance themselves because they see what's going on, and they'll say, well, to protect you, we're staying away, which doesn't really help a whole heck of a lot.
No, not at all. And I would imagine, and I want to talk a little bit later about the barriers that exist then for people getting help, for women getting help, and I can only imagine that's going to obviously be one of the barriers then, is this no social support in your network. Let's talk a little bit about, I think that people maybe sometimes from the popular press or from television and movies have a concept of who is the typical victim, and what do we know? Number one, is there even a typical victim?
Well, I wouldn't say there is a typical victim. A person can be from any socioeconomic group and be battered. The women we work with at the shelter are homeless because of domestic violence, so they naturally are most in poverty. But abuse is usually a family secret, goes on behind closed doors. Abuse between intimate partners is not going to happen on the streets. So you can be living one life, appear to be living one life in your public life, and when you go home at night, you're living another life. And there could be many people who know you, who think they know you well, who may not even realize that you are living this secret life of abuse at home.
And so what you were describing is that oftentimes women's economic situations of maybe being sort of lower income is coming about sort of because of the abusive situation that they're in, not necessarily that that's where they started.
Well, I think it's important to look at abuse as it's a secret, regardless of what kind of abuse it is. Mm-hmm. It's a family secret, and it's very shame-based, and so it's not something you want to tell people. And you might get in trouble if you do. So you go about your life looking like everything is fine. When you're on the poverty level, that's harder to do because you need resources. You're more likely to be exposed to social services or a homeless shelter. Mm-hmm. And so your business is going to be out there more.
And so what we're talking about then is that abuse or being in an abusive relation is it's sort of an equal opportunity employer then, not bound by racial or ethnic, people of all races and ethnic backgrounds, people of all educational levels then.
Well, you know, it's a cultural problem, and it's maintained by the culture, and it's maintained in economic and any other possible way if you can look at a culture. So obviously, if part of your income is dependent on keeping this a secret, you're going to.
Well, the other thing too that I like to tell the women in my group is that, for one, abuse doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what color you are, what your background is, how educated you are, or anything like that, or who you're married to. Second of all, is that abuse is about power and control, and that's the key thing. And unfortunately, society likes to put people on pedestals that have power and control. You know, they're highly respected. They are put on a pedestal. And when you get somebody that wants to be in that power and control and feels that they're very dominant and can dominate over their mate, then you have an abusive situation. And until society decides that we need to quit, you know, thinking of these people in power, that they are so wonderful and that they can walk on water, and realize that they basically put their pants on the same way as anybody else does. You know, they're not really anybody special. But also that we just need to really be aware that this really does happen to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are.
Let's talk a little bit about the cycle of abuse and the pattern of abuse and what that looks like and what people often are experiencing. Susan?
Well, that's one model, and everyone experiences domestic violence differently, and there's several models. That the power control model that we've talked about mostly here tonight, and that's the model we most often use and often see. And the other cycle of domestic violence would be sometimes people have honeymoon periods where there is a respite from the abuse, and then it builds up again into crescendo, and then there's an abusive incident, and then there's some apologies and some honeymoon type behavior, and then it de-escalates and then builds up again. And so that can be a cycle of abuse. And there's also a generational cycle of abuse where people who grow up in abusive homes don't realize that the relationships that they're encountering as they grow up aren't normal. So then they, in turn, have a household that's abusive as an adult, because they have learned that behavior. So the girls are more apt to be victims, and the boys more often are perpetrators than if you grow up in a household that wasn't abusive. So
that the family that you grew up in then sort of acts as a model for how to be older on in your adult life. And, sometimes. And that it can happen, that certainly can happen that way. I imagine that there are other people who grow up in abusive relationships and they use that as the model.
Not to be.
Model not to be.
And you never really know which way it's going to go. I have clients who have grown up in those abusive relationships, just like growing up in an alcoholic home and you want nothing to do with it. Others become alcoholics. Others, whether it's the male or the female child, follow into the family footsteps. I also have women who, and it's generally a question that I ask of, how did you grow up? And I have women who say, I had a great family. My parents were loving to me and everyone else. I don't know how I got here. And then we kind of work through that in terms of, well, how did you get here? But they're like, I just never expected this to happen to me.
I think that I found in my own practice sometime with similar women is that they're so shocked by what they are seeing that they have no way of processing that. Some of the women who I've worked with, other than to say this can't be happening, or feeling like as they were growing up and either hearing about other people, well, that would never be me. I would never find myself in that situation. And when they find themselves in that situation, are just stunned into, I don't even know what to do next because I can't believe that I'm sitting here.
Well, and a lot of times too, when you look at abuse, or the minute you ask somebody, what do they think is an abusive situation? The first thing that comes to mind is hitting someone. Normally, they don't think about it being verbal, emotional, or mental. And that's a lot of times where you'll get those people, those ladies that will say, how did I get here? Because we're all taught that growing up, if a guy hits you, you don't stand for that. You leave. That's not right. They're supposed to have respect for you. But I don't think even in today's society that young girls are taught about what verbal, emotional, and mental abuse is or what it even looks like. So when you are called those names or when you are put down or told that you're no good, you don't deserve anything better, and that it's okay to be treated with disrespect and that you don't deserve to be loved or cared for, that's kind of reinforcement then that this is really how I'm supposed to be treated and it's okay, whereas we need to say, no, that's not okay. You do deserve to have somebody love you and have respect, and they don't get to call you names.
I love what you said about that most people recognize that hitting isn't okay, but they set the bar so high that it's hitting that's not okay without thinking through that, but name calling shouldn't be okay either.
Right.
Seems like our world, though, is now getting sort of immune to that type of the words we use in our common vocabulary and in popular culture are the kinds of words that lead to abuse. Mm-hmm. I think of the word, it's a word that's commonly used now and it shouldn't be. It's wrong, and now that it's an abusive word, really, and sometimes it's not thought of that way in popular culture.
Or that we've just become somewhat of a less civilized in our discourse.
I also think it requires educating women. I think some of the women that I get don't come in to see me because they're in domestic violence. They come in for other reasons. And then we start to kind of unfold that. And they'll say, well, I've never been hit. And then we start to talk about some of the verbal things. And I said, words are bruises that do not heal easy. Do you remember being called something on the playground when you were in grade school? Do you still remember it? Yeah. I said, that's abuse. Mm-hmm. That's what a bruise looks like on your soul.
We have a call from a woman in Duluth who says, I have a friend in an abusive relationship that is escalating quickly. What can I do to get help? Susan.
Well, this friend or the woman herself can call our crisis line anytime and we'll help her with her particular situation. If it's very serious, I mean, she should call the police. That they're equipped to take the proper actions and protect her. And if it's more legal action she requires, she can come to the Justice Center and we'll help her with an order for protection. So there's lots of options.
I certainly have heard from many women that involving law enforcement is something that scares them. Mm-hmm. And the primary fear that I often hear is, I'm afraid that that's going to put me more at risk for worse abuse, or I'm going to potentially endanger my children.
Well, that's also financial. Well, what if he loses his job? Mm-hmm. Then what? What are we going to do for money?
And so, since you've helped so many women with this, Susan, tell us what would you say to that?
Well, I think you have to take each individual situation and evaluate where we really believe, and I believe, that women know their situation better than anyone else. You can lay out the options for them, and then they make the decision. And you need to empower women. That's one thing we really believe at the shelter and our organization, is that we're an empowerment organization. If we were to tell a woman what to do in a situation, we'd know better than an abuser. We're using our power and control over them. So we lay out the options and she makes the choice.
I also think that in answering this individual's question is that a woman will have to decide when it's time to leave. People can tell her and advise her and support her, but she has to ultimately make that decision.
This is a text message that we got in, or an email that we got in earlier this week for the show, and I wanted to read this because this sort of changes things just a little bit. Why would a man not leave a relationship in which he is emotionally and financially abused by his girlfriend? So I wanted to read that because it introduces sort of this element that although most of the people who are in abuse, most of the victims of domestic violence of an abusive relationship are women, that men can be abused as well. And so, Michelle, take a crack at this. Why would a man not leave a relationship? And I don't know that it's even about man or woman, but why would they not leave a relationship in which they were emotionally and financially abused?
Same reason why a woman wouldn't. There are many different reasons why women would not leave a relationship. Love, hope. They're hoping that the relationship will work out. Maybe they're married, kids, pets. It goes back to that they love, fear, the unknown. I hear that so many times in my group is the fear of the unknown. If I were to leave, what's going to happen to me? Where will I go? What can he do to me? Who can protect me? Where can I go for safety? Who's going to believe me? Because in an abusive situation, remember, she's been so isolated and has been told that she's the root of the problem, that she's the crazy one, no one's going to believe her, that she actually believes that. A woman will actually believe that if I go outside these four walls that I'm confined in, it's scary. No one is going to listen to me and say, you know what, let's help you. So a guy would be the same way.
I think also, if you look at male culture, that would be a difficult thing to talk to somebody about, is my wife is abusing me.
Sign of weakness.
Sign of weakness.
Males are not supposed to be weak. They are supposed to be strong. You show no emotion. And so for a guy to actually admit that my girlfriend is beating me up would be a big sign of weakness, would mean that, he's not a man.
We only have 5 minutes left, and I have, I have 75 minutes worth of questions. But I do want to get to this one. A woman called in, what are the effects of domestic violence on the children? Cheryl.
Well, some of which we already talked about is that it's role modeling. I've heard many times women say, well, he's not a very good husband, but he's a great father. And I say, a great father is not abusive towards their mother. And so I think watching your mother be, whether it's physically or emotionally, or being engaged in the process of, don't you think your mom is stupid? Why does she do that? That has an effect on a child. It's confusing. I'm supposed to love these people. I don't know if they love each other, but these are the two most important people in my life. And I need to honor them, and I don't know which way I'm supposed to go here. That creates a lot of confusion. I think it creates problems later in life in terms of your own relationships with people. I think there's a lot of things that can come out of that. And a lot of times people say, well, the kids are in bed. Kids know a lot.
Yep.
Kids know a lot about what's going on. They may not understand it. A 6-month-old baby picks up tension and anxiety in the environment.
Let's talk about where somebody can get help and how they can access that help. Susan.
Okay, so you can call our 24-hour crisis line, and that we can give you the referrals to all the places that, if we can't help you, we will refer you to where you can get the help. Of course, our shelter's always open too, so that's the #1 place, I guess, and the Family Justice Center. But we take these calls always, so we have real warm people. We don't have any. We don't have any answering machines.
No answering
calls.
machines. It's not outsourced to India.
No, it's not outsourced to India.
And part of also in accessing the shelter is that people can participate then in the group that you run, and that puts them into contact with other people who are experiencing the same thing, which is the opposite of isolating then as well. And I'm sure that must be what you see.
It is. The group that I teach happens to be a 36-week group, which is a closed group. It opens up every 8 weeks and everything. But the women, once they come to the group, they find such huge support and from the other women. Just walking into a room and knowing that there could be 8 or 10 other women in that room that can relate 100% to what you're going through, they actually get so much strength. They look forward to coming to that group every Wednesday night, knowing that they are going to be empowered.
Now, I said at the very beginning of the show that we would also touch a little bit on what makes up a good relationship. And so what would you say are the highlight bullet points, Cheryl, of what makes up a good relationship?
Well, equality, emotional safety, the ability to talk through problems, good communication skills, which are teachable and learnable. I think that equality and being respected, even though you may not always do everything right, and to be able to say, okay, tell me what's going on here. Tell me, what am I doing wrong? Or I need to talk to you about what's not working for me. That openness and communication, I think, can get you through all the usual things that happen in relationships. You have crises. But if you have the ability to communicate and the ability to feel safe, you can get through all that.
And I love what you said about you should be able to make a mistake, and it should be a normal human being. Mistakes should be treated respectfully and with love, and not with a sense of used against you or humiliating or belittling. I think we're just about out of time here, and so I'm cautious about going on to another question. But Michelle, I think what I would like to do is to say, if we are at the 30-second mark, so I'm not going to let you say that. But I think what I'm going to say is that I think you heard a lot of wonderful things from our guests. Number one is, if you're in an abusive relationship, the absolute take-home message is that this is not a relationship of love, and it's not a relationship that you need to stay in. There is help that you can get, and there's help if you even have questions about if you're in an abusive relationship. So thanks again to all of you for being here. We will post their referral information and their hotline on my blog this week. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links, and read my blog so you can see that hotline number. This is the place where I answer more of your questions. You can also email us your questions about next week's show, when we'll be talking about substance abuse in teens and young adults. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, and thanks for watching, and good night.